there is not a supply shock in the market to warrant a coordinated release like this. So this is a political move to try and tackle some of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing around the world at the moment. Saudi Arabia and Russia in particular have come under pressure already from President Biden to pump more oil. But they are sticking to that timeline that they had in mind. OPEC is
I think there's a high chance that you'd see GU ranging today before the FOMC news.
They respond to this at the moment.
We saw something similar last FOMC as well.
This issue is somewhat driving a wedge between the US and other consuming nations and OPEC, and of course, now with prices where they are and production back up at quite high levels, demand back up around 100 million barrels a day globally. The OPEC countries are in many ways in quite a good position.
It'd be interesting if today same thing happens as yesterday, where the London Open candle opens without a top wick and just drops down. Because look at the structure now. I mean, look at it on the 1 hour.
They are really quite keen to ignore some of these pleas from consuming nations.
That easily could happen again.
Stick with the course.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bloomberg's Saudi Bureau Chief Matthew Martin on the ground from Saudi Arabia, how this has gone down in Riyadh, because we had reporting that suggested OPEC's response function or reaction function, what that might be. So we'll look to see how we get comment coming through from there. Let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash for you right now. Here's Laura Wright.
Thanks, Anna. AstraZeneca is opening labs for its COVID products at a new UK R&D site this year as the drug maker defends its vaccine's effectiveness. CEO Pascal Soriot says its shot should be the UK is faring better with hospitalizations than Europe. In an interview with Bloomberg, he also discussed the durability of the vaccines.
It's likely that this pandemic will be an endemic over time. I mean, it is already more or less endemic in some geographies in the world, which means it will be like the flu. It will come back on a regular basis, and people may have to be vaccinated. Now, the question is, do you need to be vaccinated every year, every 2 years? We don't know that, and it will depend on the durability of these vaccines.
Sources tell us KKR is considering boosting its offer for Telecom Italia after the top investor, Vivendi, said the $12.2 billion bid was too low. Telecom Italia said on Sunday it had received a preliminary bid from KKR of 50.5 euro cents per share. KKR is said to be debating whether 70 to 80 cents a share would seal the deal. Vivendi owns about 24% of Telecom Italia. Best Buy shares have tumbled after it warned its margins are being hit by a spike in organized robberies. The US electrical goods retailer said the burglaries, sometimes by large groups of people running in to steal items, had also been traumatizing for workers. Slowing sales and promotional discounts are also weighing on the company's bottom line. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Mark, Anna.
Thank you very much. We're right in London. Coming up on the programme, sources from Germany's coalition talks are signalling that an agreement could be reached as soon as today. We're live in Berlin with the political news flow. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
As I observe,
this is what I need to know.
I see one element securing portfolios time after time. Gold. Your strategic advantage.
Here we go.
Positive change is what we do. Being impactful is what we do. Every day I come in, we have changed somebody's life. The earth has created companies that have generated jobs.
It's actually extremely fulfilling to see the impact that we're having on the planet.
It will bring people, it will bring foreign investments, and it will create jobs. What more can you ask for?
that's the no top week spell.
For us, it's a question of how do we, as rapidly as possible, transition ourselves away from a fossil fuel-based economy. And that, of course, has a huge focus on the transportation products, but it also includes energy products.
Every Friday with 30 minutes dedicated to fixed income, I'm Jonathan Ferro. This is Bloomberg Real Yield.
I told you guys about something.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets Europe. 17 minutes until the start of cash equities trading here in Europe, and futures looking fairly mixed this morning. Let's get a first look at some of the things that are on our agenda for today. At 9 a.m. this morning, we'll get data from Germany's IFO Institute. That's ahead of our interview with the IFO president, Clemens Fist. A big day for the US in terms of data as well. We'll get plenty of that, kicking off at 12 p.m. when we'll get mortgage applications data from the Mortgage Bankers Association. At 1:30 p.m. UK time, we'll get more economic data from the US, including initial jobless claims and a second reading of GDP. Then at 3 p.m., we'll round off a busy day, as I said, for American data with the PCE number, the Fed's or one of the Fed's favorite measures of inflation, that inflation gauge. And at 4 p.m., we'll get industrial production numbers from Russia. So a big focus on all that US data today and a sense of what investors in Germany and the German investor community is thinking. Sticking with Germany's Social Democrats, Greens and Free Democrats are reported to be nearing a coalition agreement to form the next government. Sources from the negotiations say that the policy agreement could be sealed as early as today before it gets put to a vote by the various parties. The new government will take office as Germany weathers the worst outbreak of COVID since the pandemic began. That's the backdrop to the news that is expected fairly shortly then. Maria Tadeo joins us from Berlin. Maria, good morning. So Olaf Scholz is not even Chancellor yet, but he's already facing a really big crisis. How will he deal with the pandemic?
Yes, Anna, and that's a big question. But when you look at this new coalition, it does seem that this is now a matter of hours before this government deal gets released, gets made public. Then, of course, after that, the rank and file members will have to approve it. And then by December 6th, Olaf Scholz will be the next Chancellor of Germany. Now, in the context, all of this should have been, in principle, good news. This was a very quick agreement. It does seem that there is consensus between the three different parties. And for the SPD and Olaf Scholz himself, this would have been a big triumph. The problem is all of this is now completely eclipsed by the pandemic. I can tell you, Anna, you put on the German news, there's no news about this coalition. It's all about the hospitals across Germany and the infection rate. And for Olaf Scholz, it also means that he has a first crisis, a big one, already waiting for him. He's going to have to make a lot of the big decisions that Germany has avoided for months now, whether or not there's a vaccine mandate, whether or not the country needs more restrictions, more checks. Just today, by the way, there's already rumors, speculations that one of the big sticking points that is preventing this deal right now at this point is that nobody wants to be health minister. This is a job that's proven very difficult to place with a minister. Again, a lot of this is the last minute speculation that comes before a deal like this is announced, but it is funny that it's that job and not the finance minister that does seem to be creating the tension in this deal.
And what about the rest of the policy agenda, Maria? I mean, how will this coalition work between these three parties?
Well, this is three different groups, of course, coming together. In principle, they don't have a similar agenda, but they do seem to show that they want to work together. And there's a lot for them to get through. Of course, we're talking about the Fit for 55, the new industrial policy for Germany, financial measures, also fiscal measures that will have to be debated. What I can tell you is that right now in Berlin, particularly in the political circles of the city, it's almost a given that Christian Lindner will be the finance minister and that Robert Habeck, the co-leader of the Greens, will be the work, but also mega environmental minister. Of course, I do want to stress, however, that the focus does seem to be on the pandemic. This is a big crisis that they'll have to put and fight together and push through. There's already speculation, by the way, that one of the big measures that they will announce is that on public transportation, there will be checks to check whether or not you're vaccinated or not. So again, the focus is very much still on the pandemic and how to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pandemic hanging over these coalition negotiations. Maria, thank you very much. Maria, today with the latest in Berlin. We'll be sure to bring you any breaking news around coalition formation in Germany as we get it. Let's get a Bloomberg First Word News update this morning. Here's Laura.
Thanks, Hannah. The Kiwi fell after New Zealand hiked its benchmark rate and signalled it will need to tighten policy faster than previously expected to contain inflation. The RBNZ raised borrowing costs by 25 basis points to 0.75%, as predicted by most economists. The central bank's latest forecasts show it expects to lift the cash rate to 2% by the end of 2022, a year sooner than projected 3 months ago. The Turkish lira has steadied after plunging to a record low of more than 13 against the dollar, falling as much as 15% at one point yesterday. Bloomberg understands the currency crisis triggered an unscheduled meeting between the president and his central bank chief. In a statement, Turkey's central bank said the currency moves were, quote, completely detached from economic fundamentals. China has called on people to, quote, stop the malicious hype about tennis star Peng Shuai. Her disappearance earlier this month after alleging sexual assault by a top Communist Party official caused international outcry. A foreign ministry spokesman said the care should not be politicized. Peng was seen in images released over the weekend by Chinese state media and the International Olympic Committee. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Mark, Anna, Laura, thank you. Laura Wright, you're in London. Coming up on this programme, we'll look at your stocks to watch this morning, including in the airline sector. Ryanair sees the travel rebound being threatened by new COVID curves in Europe. Let's get into that conversation next. This is Bloomberg.
I've spent centuries evolving with the world. That's the nature of being the economy, observing investors choose assets to balance risk and reward, with one element securing portfolios time after time: gold. Agile and liquid, a proven protector. An ever-evolving enabler of bold decisions, an asset more relevant than ever before. Gold, your strategic advantage.
Positive change is what we do. Being impactful is what we do. Every day I come in, we have changed somebody's life. The earth has created companies that have generated jobs.
It's actually extremely fulfilling to see the impact that we're having on the planet.
It will bring people, it will bring foreign investments, and it will create jobs. What more can you ask for?
Potentially adding another entry.
To that point, when the cases are so low, they're barely detectable. That's what herd immunity means. We don't know what that percentage is, David.
Basically, I think that's the market splitting. Which is something I like to do.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets Europe. Still 9 minutes until the start of cash equities trading. Things look fairly mixed this morning, although things, the futures picture in London a little worse than elsewhere, but then it had a better day yesterday. Let's get to the stocks we're watching with our reporter Lizzie Burden, who's with us on set here in London. Good morning to you, Lizzie. Let's start with the aviation sector then. And what are we hearing from Ryanair?
Well, CEO Michael O'Leary said yesterday that it could be a bumpy Christmas for Ryanair because of these lockdowns in Germany and Austria. And he said that there could be even more pressure on bookings next summer if the US reviews its reopening. But contrast that with the comments from Virgin Atlantic CEO Shai Weiss. He says he doesn't see a reopening being held back because it's different in Europe. It's more about low take-up of vaccine boosters investors than a new viral threat. So we'll be keeping an eye on Ryanair this morning.
Or at least pull into it.
Lizzie, Virgin Money is another one of your stocks to watch. What's the story there?
Yeah, British financial services and banking brand. It's published its full year results this morning. Pre-tax profit of £801 million. But most importantly, more information on its digital transformation. It's set to close almost 1 in 5 branches in the coming months. And Jefferies analysts say that that's going to weigh on profits. So we see how they do this morning.
And what's the story out of Johnson Matthey? This company, maker of catalytic converters, amongst other things.
Yeah, well, it's published its interim results, posted a loss. And the story is it's abandoned the quest for car batteries, which has really frustrated investors. It's on the brink of falling out of the FTSE 100 at the quarterly review of the index next week. And Berenberg has said that the appointment of Liam Condon as the group's boss means it could spell the breakup of the group or make it more likely at least. And Credit Suisse has downgraded the stock. It says the growth strategy is not clear enough.
Yes, somewhat unclear in the words of the analyst over at CS. So thanks very much for that, Lizzie. Lizzie Burden with the latest on the stocks that we are watching. So a host of different stories to watch this morning then, Mark, when it comes to the start of the European trading day. But broadly speaking, I mean, market's a little bit confusing, I suppose, this week. We are heading into Thanksgiving. Is that the source of the confusion, the fact we can sort of pivot from one yield narrative to another, one day to the next?
Yeah, I think it is honestly due to the Thanksgiving holiday and the kind of reducing of positions ahead of that, and the fact that we have some big catalysts on the agenda today. We have a lot of US data, an immense amount of US data, and we have FOMC minutes. And people are wary of the fact that we've got these big catalysts and a very, very short window to react, which means it's not a great environment to take short-term positions. You might have less liquidity to kind of get out of them or change them after this. But I wouldn't think that the markets are wrapping up yet. The fact that we've got low participation does mean we could still get some very, very sharp moves later on today. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting session, even if it's confusing.
Yes. Yeah, and what are you going to be watching for in terms of the US data then, Mark? Because I think as well as a host of other things to do with jobless claims, durable goods, we also get consumer sentiment, and that was a really important data point last time around.
I think one of the things that's interesting today is we've got so many different types of data points. We've got core PCE on the prices side. We've got GDP, which is a bit more backward looking. We've got consumer data. We've got durable goods, which is kind of really important, solid, kind of high frequency data point. I think what's important is that it's going to take a few minutes to kind of parse through all the different signals we're getting. The general picture, though, going into this data has been very, very strong US data. It's been surprising on the upside recently. It's been robust. I think growth data matters more than prices data at the moment. And I think if we continue the trend of recent action, it's really going to increase the pressure on the Fed to change policy next month and perhaps speed up their tapering.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for spending the past hour with us. So remember, MLIV Go is the function to use if you want more thoughts from the Markets Live team. Mark Cudmore and his colleagues, of course, busy on that blog throughout your trading day. Of course, the market open is up next here in Europe, just a few minutes to go until the start of European equity trading here in Europe. And futures have been a little mixed this morning. Euro Stoxx 50 futures point to the upside. US futures show NASDAQ futures a little firmer. Dow E-mini futures, though, to the downside. That is it for this hour of programming. This is Bloomberg.
I've spent centuries evolving with the world. That's the nature of being the economy, observing investors choose assets to balance risk and reward, with one element securing portfolios time after time: gold. Agile and liquid, a proven protector. An ever-evolving enabler of bold decisions, an asset more relevant than ever before. Gold, your strategic advantage.
Can I rely on rigorous fundamental research that looks beyond the spreadsheets to truly understand if a company is worth investing in? With Capital Group, I can.
Hello, I'm Mark Wright, and I'm all about getting people into shape. And to keep my business in shape, I need strong digital marketing. Trust me, you don't need any cheesy marketing gimmicks. You know what I'm saying? Now it's time to find your audience online with Fiverr.
In just one click, you can access talented digital marketers to suit your budget and deadlines. They'll help build your marketing strategy, boost your SEO, run online campaigns, and more.
What are you waiting for? Join me on Fiverr.com. Down by 3 basis points. The New Zealand dollar is in focus, of course. We had this in the headline, the fact that the central bank came in with a quarter-point increase in rates. That wasn't only a survey by Bloomberg, but some market participants clearly had expected a bigger rate increase. They're looking at 2% by the end of 2022. Brent in focus, up 0.4% at $82 a barrel. Fran.
Yeah, so the focus, of course, if you look at some of the sectors, is on some of the inflationary companies, certainly some of the sectors that would suffer the most from an inflationary swing. So, for example, we look at banks. If there's an interest rate hike, then that would be beneficial for them. Energy actually leading gains, up 0.7%. Again, they're not huge gains, Tom, but if you look at what we heard from oil, certainly President Biden saying that it should be redistributed in terms of the retail gasoline prices at a 70-year high, that 10 cents that they're actually benefiting because of the release of strategic reserves that should be passed on to the consumer. Then basic resources, tech, both up some 0.9%. 0.5%. It's the autos and retail that are leading the losses. Autos down to 0.2%. So it's not huge moves. We're kind of in the range of either falling or gaining between 0.3 and 0.4. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Laura Wright. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Francine. Cathy Wood says the money manager is holding off on adding bets in Chinese markets amid concerns about Beijing's crackdown on some of the country's high-profile tycoons. Speaking at a webinar organised by Bloomberg Intelligence, the ARK founder says China remains a very innovative nation, but there are concerns over the erosion of incentives for entrepreneurs. AstraZeneca is opening labs for its COVID products at a new UK R&D site this year as the drug maker defends its vaccine effectiveness. CEO Pascal Soriot says its shot could be the reason the UK is faring better with hospitalizations from Europe. In an interview with Bloomberg, he also discussed the durability of vaccines.
Likely that this pandemic will be an endemic over time. I mean, it is already more or less endemic in some geographies in the world, which means it will be like the flu. It will come back on a regular basis, and people may have to be vaccinated. Now, the question is, you need to be vaccinated every year, every 2 years? We don't know that, and it will depend on the durability of this vaccine.
Sources tell us KKR is considering boosting its offer for Telecom Italia after the top investor Vivendi said $12.2 billion for the bid was too low. Telecom Italia said on Sunday it had received a preliminary bid from KKR of 50.5 euro cents per share. KKR is said to be debating whether 70 to 80 cents a share would seal the deal. Vivendi owns around 24% of Telecom Italia. Best Buy shares have tumbled after its margins are being hit by a spike in organised robberies. The US electrical goods retailer said the burglaries, sometimes by large groups of people running in to steal items, had also been traumatizing for workers. Slowing sales and promotional discounts are also weighing on the company's bottom line. As the Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom Francine.
Laura, thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's bring in our markets reporter, Justina Lee. Justina, there's a lot of data, as we're mentioning, out of the US, also the Fed minutes. Where's the focus of the market's going to be in terms of trying to get a direction, a steer, as to the next response from the Fed?
Right. I think a lot of traders are really going to be watching to see if there are any clues on how fast the Fed plans to taper asset purchases. And of course, a lot of that is going to depend on how they see inflation right now. Are they a little bit more worried after the recent CPI numbers that maybe it's not as transitory as they had first thought? And I think this is really coming in an interesting time because we've had this big surge in real yields recently after Biden renominated people price out, a more dovish trajectory under Brainard. So I think people are waiting to see if, the Fed is going to change their mind on that front.
Yeah, and there's a couple of policy moves, including what we saw in New Zealand.
Right, exactly. And I think, that's why markets have been reacting so strongly lately, because it's not just about the Fed right now. It's about this seeming tightening trajectory that a lot of global central banks are kind of embarking on. And this is really also kind of moving stock internals. We saw that big plunge in tech in the last 2 sessions in the US as well.
Is there any sense of whether that continues for technology? I mean, particularly the meme stocks, some of those profitless software companies, the ETFs looking at IPOs, all taking a hit. Maybe this is a healthy paring back of some of these bets?
Right. I mean, we've kind of seen this pattern quite a lot in the last few years, which is when bond yields rise, usually tech does poorly. And it's exactly like you said, especially with profitless tech stocks, when discount rates go up, you can see investors kind of losing a bit of patience for those profits to eventually materialize. So it seems like with Treasury yields kind of down a little bit today, maybe we'll have like the NASDAQ catching a bit of a breather. But I think in terms of those stock internals, people are really going to be watching the macro moves as well.
Justina, we're also, of course, looking at the price of oil. I mean, we were talking about extensively yesterday. It was a little bit disappointing in terms of the amount released, and it was widely expected. So what does it do for the price of oil? And actually, will that be passed on to the consumer?
Right, exactly. I mean, the surge in oil has really kind of put pressure on consumers lately. And I think, it was kind of interesting because we actually saw oil, rose further, as you said, kind of yesterday after that headline. And it seems like people are also waiting to see what the reaction from OPEC is. And I think that will be kind of a big factor in the U.S. inflationary picture going forward.
Yeah, you're currently looking at Brent $82 a barrel, WTI at $78 a barrel. So it's on divergence between Brent and WTI. In terms of dollar strength, and we've just seen such a strong run-up over the last few weeks and months for the greenback. Obviously, that is going to be tied to whatever happens regarding taper and expectations around rate hikes. But do we expect broadly more sustained upside for the greenback, and how does that read across to particularly the EM space?
Right, exactly. And I think people are really looking at kind of the relative pace of tightening all across the world. I mean, for a long time, people were expecting, I guess, the U.S. to go a little bit faster. I mean, and it seems like that is still the picture lately, especially with kind of Powell still at the helm of the Fed, and maybe people are expecting that tightening pace to kind of go forward.
Justina, we're also hearing, KKR said to weigh raising its Telecom Italia bid to win over Vivendi. We also have, something else that could be sold for $8 billion. Are we going to see just much more M&A in general because of some of these valuations, especially in Europe?
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that's a really kind of interesting question, because we have seen a lot of deal activities lately, and I think this was kind of another big one that kind of people are looking at.
Justina, thank you so much. Justina Lee there with the very latest on the markets. And we have some breaking news out of Germany.
Yeah, we've been watching for this, and Maria today on the ground in Berlin is going to flesh this out for us. But Olaf Scholz coming out and saying that he sees a coalition deal to become the next German chancellor. The German SPD, the FDP, the Greens will present a coalition deal today. That's going to happen today. So significance in terms of moving forward on bringing these parties together for that coalition. And Maria's talking about the challenges, of course, notably COVID.
Yeah, and yesterday we already had a bit of a breakdown, or at least a glimpse of the cabinet. It wasn't 100% confirmed, but we definitely have that template. So we'll see if Olaf Scholz, the new chancellor of Germany, actually confirms that. Now, coming up, much more on the markets. We also delve into Germany. We'll get into what the moves in yields could actually mean for stocks with Beata Manti, global equity strategist at Citi. This is Bloomberg.
I've spent centuries evolving with the world. That's the nature of being the economy, observing investors choose assets to balance risk and reward, with one element securing portfolios time after time: gold. Agile and liquid, a proven protector. An ever-evolving enabler of bold decisions. An asset more relevant than ever before. Gold, your strategic advantage.
Need to run social media ads? Go to Fiverr.com. Select your service. Choose an expert. And get your social media ads running today. Freelance services on demand. Start now.
As we have by making it easier for working parents to afford to go back to work.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
to the open, everyone. 12 minutes into the European trading day, and you can see we're kind of trading sideways. A little bit of a lift in the last 10 minutes or so to the European stocks, gaining some 0.3%, but really the Q will depend on what we get from the Fed minutes, and then a little bit of U.S. data. It's all about monetary policy once again. Now, let's get some breaking news in the last few minutes. We understand that Germany's Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats are to present a coalition agreement to form the next government with Olaf Scholz as a head. Now, a policy agreement has finally been sealed, we understand, and will be presented a little bit later today before it gets put to a vote. We're also expecting a news conference at 3 p.m. Berlin time. So let's get straight to our reporter on the ground, Maria Tadeo, who's in Berlin. Maria, is this pretty much expected? It's the kind of coalition that we thought we'd have. Any surprises? And, how did they deal with COVID?
Yes, Francine, and that is a big question for this coalition. Now, if you take a step back and you look at the election that we had on September 26th, the fact that Olaf Scholz has been able to bring three different parties together, that he's able to get this done in about 2 months, should have been a big testament to his political ambitions, and it should have been, to some extent, a big win for the SPD. The problem is that all of this has now been eclipsed by the pandemic. There's many questions that Olaf Scholz is going to have to face. Does he want to go for a vaccine mandate the way the Austrians have done? Does he want to go for more restrictions in the country? We are seeing a number of regional leaders saying the federal government, the next government, has to come with a plan. Now, in terms of the names that we're expecting, of course, we're keeping a very close eye on the finance ministry. I have to say, in Berlin, it's almost a given now that this will go to Christian Lindner. There's also a lot of speculation that there will be a mega environment ministry combined with a works ministry that would go for the Greens. But the big question, and again, it goes back to the pandemic, is who is going to be the next health minister. And just yesterday, that was proven to be a very difficult job to fill. So there's a lot of focus in terms of who is that health minister, and who's the person that Olaf Scholz will trust to deal with this pandemic.
And Maria, obviously we can't unpick the pandemic and what's happening in terms of COVID-19 and the spread in Germany from the economy, but do we know what the economic focus, the financial focus will be for this team once they take their seats?
Yes, and when you look at the campaign, Olaf Scholz said that he wanted to increase the minimum wage. He talked about rebalancing the German economy. There's also big questions that will come with the industrial policy. We know there's a lot of regulation that is coming over from Brussels, in particular the Fit for 55. This is something that for the German industry could be key in the next 10 years. There's, of course, all the climate agenda that is also coming in from Brussels. The Greens have also said they want to accelerate their transition out of carbon. And then, of course, you have everything that has to do with China and how to make that relationship a two-way street. So there's a lot of the agenda, but I would argue the first focus point and the real test for this pandemic is how to deal with COVID. That will be the big mission and big crisis for Olaf Scholz to deal with.
Maria, thank you so much. Maria Tadeo, they're in Berlin for us, and we understand that for the vote, they're aiming for a week the 6th, so we could have a new government in place pretty soon. Now, let's turn to the markets. Joining us is Beata Manti, a global equity strategist at Citi. Beata, thank you for joining us. We were just talking about some of the coalition movements over in Germany, and it's very clear that the biggest concern and the biggest challenge for any person in charge at the moment in Europe is how to deal with COVID. Does that mean that you have to, look and take down some of your forecast for equities, or do you think valuations are so low that it will make a huge difference?
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. In terms, you're right that the growth concerns are number one concern on investors' minds right now. And we have to remember that we are entering these new lockdowns in Europe with growth already subsiding. So our economies have been already cutting their GDP forecast for the last 2 months. So globally, we now expect a 4.2% GDP growth. A month ago, it was 4.4% of GDP growth. And of course, if Germany went into the full lockdown, that would absolutely affect the GDP as well. And then what matters for equities, it could also affect the EPS growth for the next year, right? And like a simple rule of thumb that our economists have out of the example of Austria is that 1 month of lockdown, of complete lockdown in the country, takes away 1% of annual GDP. So 1 month is 1% of annual GDP off. So definitely we are going to see effects of it.
Yeah, so certainly not insignificant. So when you weigh that up against the commentary that we've had from some ECB officials, some slightly more hawkish commentary from some of the ECB officials, arguably, do you buy...
shit.
Alright, so sales didn't really work out on GJ. As I extended the target down here, with volume we did not reach there. What instead happened is we came down to fill these wicks to the left, which was TP1, but I was expecting price to just push down a bit further, but that did not happen. That was not the case. Price rejected that, this 4-hour level, and now it's continuing up. So it looks like it's just one kind of big fake out on the 1 hour time frame, probably to continue up now, but obviously you have to be careful of 154 flat of that level. So this was one loss. Could have been a 13 pip win, but I was aiming for further because I did expect further downside just with the volume and the way that Owl closed that very nicely. Expecting a little reaction off these, but not a full retracement up, and then for this to hold and to come down, but that did not happen.